In a world built of glass and judgment, kindness is often mistaken for weakness. The city was a monument to this principle, its steel towers piercing a sky that was indifferent to the struggles below. On the wet pavement, ambition and cruelty were currencies traded more freely than compassion. For those who had everything, the lives of those with nothing were a form of background noise, a faint, inconvenient hum they could choose to ignore. But sometimes, a single act of defiance, an act of pure, uncalculated empathy, can send a tremor through the foundations of power, catching the attention of forces that operate in the shadows. It is in these moments that the world reveals its true nature, that the most powerful are not always the loudest, and that the quietest heart can command the most terrifying loyalty. This is a story about a girl who offered a hand to a fallen stranger, and in doing so, unknowingly reached into the heart of a hidden empire. Annalise felt the city's indifference like a physical weight. At 20, she moved through the polished opulence of the Gilded Cup cafe in a simple white dress and a long, crimson apron, a splash of vibrant color in a world of muted, expensive grays and beiges. The cafe was a terrarium for the city's elite, a place where women with surgically perfected faces and men with predatory smiles came to be seen. They spoke in low, conspiratorial tones, their laughter sharp and brittle like shattering glass. Annalise served them their artisanal coffees and delicate pastries, her expression carefully neutral, her spirit worn thin by the thousand tiny cuts of their condescension. She was an artist without a canvas, a scholar without a book, her dreams deferred by the crushing reality of rent and bills. Each day was a performance of quiet servitude, her own thoughts and hopes locked away behind a polite, practiced smile. Rain began to streak down the vast plate glass windows, blurring the afternoon light and turning the world outside into a watercolor of bleeding headlights and slick, black asphalt. The patrons inside paid it no mind, insulated by wealth and warmth. It was then that an old woman entered, her presence a quiet disruption. She wore a simple but elegant dark green dress, her silver hair coiled neatly, her movements dignified but hesitant. She seemed out of place, not because of poverty, but because of her lack of pretense. She carried an aura of old-world grace that felt alien in this temple of modern vanity. Annalise watched her navigate the treacherous, freshly polished marble floor, a faint line of concern creasing her brow. The old woman, Chio, took another tentative step, her sensible shoes finding no purchase on the mirror-like surface. Her foot slid out from under her, and she went down hard. The fall was sudden, a sickening thud of bone against stone that silenced the cafe for a single, suspended moment. The silence was immediately broken not by gasps of concern, but by a wave of muffled, cruel laughter. At a corner table, a trio of women adorned in designer labels and dripping with jewelry barely hid their amusement behind manicured hands. "Oh, dear," one of them stage-managed a gasp, her eyes glittering with malice. "Did someone misplace their grandmother?" Her friend chimed in, her voice a high-pitched sneer. "They really should keep the infirm at home. It's so unpleasant." Their laughter grew louder, an ugly, self-satisfied sound that echoed the room's coldness. The cafe manager, a man whose spine was made of ambition rather than bone, froze near the counter, his face a mask of panic. His only concern was the disruption to the atmosphere, the stain on his pristine establishment. He made no move to help, but Annalise did. Without a second thought, she broke from her station, her red apron a streak of defiance. She knelt beside the fallen woman, ignoring the stares and the whispers that followed her like a foul odor. "Ma'am, are you all right? Can you move?" she asked, her voice low and steady, a small island of warmth in an ocean of contempt. Chio looked up, her face pale with shock and pain, but her eyes were clear and sharp. She saw the genuine worry in Annalise's face, a stark contrast to the derision surrounding them. I, I think so, Chio whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Annalise gently took her arm. Here, lean on me. Let's get you to a chair. With surprising strength, she helped the older woman to her feet, shielding her from the curious, mocking eyes of the other patrons. She led Chio to a quiet, vacant table, her movements efficient and tender. She brought a glass of water and a cool, damp cloth, dabbing gently at a scrape on the woman's hand, her focus entirely on the person in front of her, a silent rebuke to the entire room. The manager, finally spurred to action by the perceived breach of protocol, descended upon their table. His face was pinched with displeasure. "Annalise, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low but venomous. "You're making a scene. Get back to your station." Annalise looked up, her eyes flashing with a rare fire. "This woman fell, Mr. Henderson. She needed help. Your job is to serve coffee, not play nurse," he retorted, his gaze flicking dismissively toward Chio. "You've disturbed the other guests." He gestured vaguely at the table of laughing women, who were now complaining theatrically about the commotion. The message was clear. Their comfort was paramount. An old woman's dignity was not. Later, Annalise was called into the back office and informed that the cost of the disruption, including a complimentary round of champagne for the offended table, would be docked from her already meager pay. The injustice of it settled in her chest, heavy and cold. After her shift, she found Chio waiting patiently near the entrance. She insisted on getting her a taxi, holding an umbrella over the woman's silver hair as the rain continued its relentless downpour. Chio tried to press a thick fold of cash into her hand. "Please, for your kindness. And for your trouble," Annalise gently pushed it back.
"No, ma'am."
"I couldn't. You don't pay someone for being a decent human being." Chio smiled, a faint, knowing expression. "In this city, you do," but she did not insist. As the taxi pulled away, Annalise noticed a small, silk handkerchief had fallen onto the wet pavement. She picked it up. It was exquisitely made, embroidered with a single, stylized chrysanthemum. She tucked it into her apron pocket, a small, beautiful secret. Across the street, parked in the deepening twilight, was a black sedan with windows as dark as obsidian. Inside, a man in a severe suit spoke quietly into a phone, his eyes fixed on Annalise as she turned to walk home. "The incident is concluded," he reported. "The girl's name is Annalise. She refused payment in a penthouse high above the city, a place of shadows and silence." Ryusei listened, his expression unreadable. He stood before a window that displayed the sprawling, glittering metropolis like a conquered territory. "My mother?" he asked, his voice a low vibration that held the chilling stillness of a predator. "She is unharmed," the lieutenant confirmed. But she was disrespected. A long silence stretched across the line. The city lights reflected in Ryusei's dark, unblinking eyes. "Send me the surveillance footage," he commanded. "And the names of everyone at that table. And the manager. I want to know everything about the girl." Ryusei was not a man given to emotional displays. His empire, a sprawling, clandestine network that coiled unseen beneath the city's legitimate businesses, was built on control, precision, and the absolute certainty of consequence. He did not feel anger in the way others did. He experienced it as a cold, clarifying focus, a problem demanding a solution. He sat in his minimalist office, a cavern of polished concrete and smoked glass, and watched the security footage from the Gilded Cup on a large, high-definition screen. He watched it 3 times. The first time, he watched his mother, Chio, his face an impassive mask, but a muscle feathered in his jaw as she fell, a flicker of vulnerability that was never supposed to be exposed to such a world. The second time, he watched the patrons. He zoomed in on the faces of the women at the corner table, their features distorted by ugly, privileged mirth. He committed their faces, their jewelry, their arrogant postures to memory. He listened to their recorded voices, the cruel, dismissive words hanging in the silent air of his office like a death sentence. The third time, he watched only Annalise. He saw the instant she moved, the lack of hesitation, the protective way she knelt and shielded his mother from view. He saw her face, filled with a compassion so pure it seemed almost archaic, a relic from a better world. He saw her stand up to the manager, her small frame radiating a quiet, unshakable dignity. He saw her refuse the money, an act that, in his world, was more profound than any declaration. Kindness, without the expectation of reward, was a language he rarely encountered, and it fascinated him. He paused the footage on a close-up of her face, her brows furrowed in concern as she tended to his mother's hand. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that came from her spirit, not from artifice. It was the beauty of light in a dark place. And the world, he knew, was always trying to extinguish such lights. Annalise, meanwhile, walked home through the rain, the damp chill seeping into her bones. She was exhausted, demoralized, and poorer than when she started the day. She thought of the laughing women, of her manager's cowardice, and felt a familiar sense of hopelessness. The world was rigged, and she was on the losing side. She was just a waitress, invisible and disposable. She had no idea that at that very moment, she had become the singular focus of the city's most powerful and dangerous man, a man who was already rewriting her future and the futures of those who had wronged her. 2 days later, the consequence Annalise had expected arrived. Mr. Henderson called her into his office, his demeanor slick with false regret. "Annalise, I'm afraid we have to let you go," he said, avoiding her eyes. "There have been complaints about your attitude. You're not a good fit for our clientele." The lie was so thin it was transparent. She was being fired for an act of basic decency. She didn't argue. There was no point. She simply nodded, removed her crimson apron, folded it neatly on his desk, and walked out of the Gilded Cup for the last time. The sense of defeat was absolute. She stepped out onto the street, the afternoon sun feeling harsh and alien after the dim lighting of the cafe. She clutched her worn purse, her mind racing with the terrifying calculus of unemployment. How would she make rent? Where would she even start looking for another job? It was in that moment of profound vulnerability that a long, black car, the kind that seemed to absorb the light around it, glided to a silent stop beside her. The rear window, tinted to an impossible darkness, slid down with a faint whir. Inside sat a man. He was flawlessly dressed in a dark suit, his features sharp and beautiful, like a sculpture carved from granite. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were dark, intelligent, and held a stillness that was utterly unnerving. It was Ryusei. He looked at her not with pity, but with a gaze of intense, analytical focus. "Annalise," he said. Her name on his lips was not a question, but a statement. It sent a shiver of alarm through her. "You are dismissed because of an act of compassion," he continued, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in her very bones. "That is an error. And I am a man who corrects errors." Annalise stared, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was this man? How did he know her name? How did he know what had happened? Fear warred with a desperate curiosity. He was danger. She could feel it radiating from him like heat, but he was also the first person to acknowledge the injustice she had suffered. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. He offered a ghost of a smile, a slight, almost imperceptible upward tilt of his lips that did not reach his eyes. "You don't need to. Get in the car, Annalise. I'm offering you a ride." It was not a request. There was a subtle command in his tone, a quiet certainty that she would comply. She hesitated for only a second, looking from his impossibly calm face to the unforgiving street, and made a choice. She opened the heavy door and slid into the cool, leather-scented interior of the car, leaving her old life behind on the curb. The car did not move toward her small, run-down apartment building. It sliced through the city's arteries with silent efficiency, heading toward the district of glittering skyscrapers and impossible wealth, a part of the city Annalise had only ever seen from a distance. She sat rigidly on the plush leather seat, the silence in the car thick and heavy. She risked a glance at the man beside her. Ryusei stared straight ahead, his profile severe and perfect against the blur of the passing cityscape. He seemed to exist in a bubble of absolute control, a world away from her own chaotic, hand-to-mouth existence. The fear that had been a spark was now a steady flame in her chest. Where was he taking her? What did he want? Finally, the car descended into a private underground garage and came to a stop before a set of elevator doors. A man in a dark suit, the same man she now vaguely recognized from across the street from the cafe, opened her door. Ryusei led her into the elevator, which ascended with dizzying, silent speed. The doors opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was less a home and more a statement of power. The space was vast, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the entire city. The furniture was sparse but exquisite, the art on the walls was museum quality, and the air itself felt different, rarefied and still. And standing by the window, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun, was Chio. She was no longer the shaken, slightly disheveled woman from the cafe. She was dressed in a shimmering silk kimono, her bearing regal and serene. She looked at Annalise and gave her a warm, genuine smile. "Annalise," she said, her voice gentle. "I am so glad to see you again." The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying jolt. Annalise looked from Chio's kind face to the cold, watchful expression of the man beside her. "He's your son," she whispered, the realization dawning. Chio nodded. "My son, Ryusei. Wish to thank you personally for your kindness." Ryusei finally spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Kindness like yours is a rare commodity. It should be rewarded, not punished." He gestured around the vast apartment. "I have dealt with your former employer. He will not be troubling anyone again. As for you, I have a proposition. My mother requires a companion, someone to accompany her, to talk with, to ensure her comfort. The position comes with accommodation here and a salary that will ensure you never have to worry about money again." It was a lifeline, a fantasy, a dream come true. But as she looked at the armored windows and the silent, imposing figure of Ryusei, it felt like the bars of a beautiful, gilded cage closing around her. It wasn't a job offer, it was a summons. He wasn't asking. He was informing her of her new reality. Annalise's new life began. She moved into a suite of rooms within the penthouse that was larger and more luxurious than any apartment she could have ever imagined. Her days were spent with Chio, a gentle rhythm of conversation, walks in the building's private rooftop garden, and shared meals. Chio was a well of quiet wisdom and unexpected humor, and a genuine affection grew between the two women. Chio spoke of art, of history, of the Japan she had left behind, but she never spoke of what her son did. She didn't have to. The truth was in the air, in the silent deference of the staff, in the lethal stillness of the bodyguards who were a constant, unobtrusive presence, and most of all, in Ryusei himself. He was a ghost in his own home, often absent for days, and when he was present, he filled the space with a palpable, dangerous energy. Annalise found herself watching him, fascinated and terrified in equal measure. She saw the way Chio's presence softened him, the only chink in his armor. But his attention on Annalise was different. It was a constant low-level surveillance and assessment. He would find her reading in the library and simply stand in the doorway, watching, his expression unreadable. "You are adjusting," he stated one evening, finding her on the balcony overlooking the sea of city lights. "This isn't a life you adjust to," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "It's a life you survive, a flicker of something amusement, respect." Crossed his face. Survival is the foundation of all else, but her presence had not gone unnoticed in the city's underworld. Ryusui's obsession with a civilian, an unknown waitress, was a topic of hushed speculation among his rivals. To a man named Kazuo, a predator who ran a rival syndicate with brutal ambition, it was more than gossip. It was an opportunity. Kazuo saw this girl not as a person, but as a lever, a weakness in Ryusui's impenetrable fortress. One afternoon, while Annalise and Chio were visiting a private art gallery, the threat materialized. It wasn't overt. It was a black van that circled the block one too many times. It was two men whose eyes lingered too long. It was the subtle, chilling feeling of being watched, of being hunted. Annalise felt it first, a prickle of unease on her skin learned from a life of being vulnerable. She subtly moved closer to Chio, her body tensing. Their bodyguard noticed it a second later, his hand moving discreetly inside his jacket as he murmured into his wrist. The response was instantaneous and terrifying. Within minutes, two more of Ryusui's black cars materialized, boxing them in protectively. The message was sent and received. But the incident changed everything. That night, Ryusui informed Annalise she was no longer permitted to leave the penthouse without his express permission and a full security detail. "I am not your prisoner," she argued, her fear making her bold. He stepped closer, his sheer size and intensity overwhelming. "You became a target the moment I took an interest in you," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I am not your jailer, Annalise. I am the only thing standing between you and them." The gilded cage had become a fortress, and Annalise felt its walls closing in. The forced proximity with Ryusui was a constant source of friction and a strange, unwelcome intimacy. They were two poles of a magnet, repelling and attracting with equal force. She would challenge his cold logic with her impassioned morality, and he would counter her arguments with the brutal, undeniable truth of the world he commanded. He started bringing her gifts, not extravagant jewels, but things that showed he was paying attention. A rare first edition of a book she'd mentioned loving. A set of professional-grade charcoal pencils and sketch pads. Each gift felt like a silken thread, binding her more tightly to him. A debt she could never repay. She resisted, but the loneliness of her old life was a stark contrast to the charged, dangerous reality of her new one. At least here, she was seen. Kazuo, however, was not a man to be deterred by a show of force. He saw Ryusui's protective measures as confirmation of the girl's importance. A direct assault was suicide, but an opportunity would present itself. It came during a massive charity gala held at a downtown museum, an event Ryusui had to attend for business reasons. Security was layered, a fortress within a fortress. Annalise, at Chio's insistence, attended as well, dressed in a stunning sapphire gown that made her feel like an imposter. For a few hours, surrounded by the city's legitimate elite, the danger felt distant. It was a fatal illusion. Kazuo's plan was surgical. He didn't use force. He used deception. A faked fire alarm. A momentary, controlled panic. A planned evacuation route that diverted a small number of guests through a service corridor. In the confusion, Annalise was separated from Chio and Ryusui's guards. For a terrifying minute, she was alone in the throng of panicked guests. That was all it took. A hand clamped over her mouth, a needle pricked her arm, and the world dissolved into blackness. When news reached Ryusui, who was in the process of securing his mother, the reaction was not the explosive rage his men expected. It was far worse. A profound, absolute silence fell over him. The air grew cold. His dark eyes went flat, empty of all emotion save for a terrifying, bottomless resolve. He turned to his lieutenant, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried across the chaotic ballroom with the force of a thunderclap. "Find her," he commanded. "Burn this city to the ground if you have to. But find her," the hunt began. It was not a police investigation. It was a systematic, technological, and brutally human sweep of the city, executed by an army that lived in the shadows. Ryusiai's organization, dormant and unseen, rose to the surface, its tentacles reaching into every corner of the metropolis. There was no escape. Annalise awoke in a cold, damp room. Her head throbbed, and a metallic taste filled her mouth. Fear, sharp and acidic, clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of her terror. A man entered the room. He was well-dressed, his smile predatory. It was Kazuo. "Annalise," he said, circling her chair like a shark. "The girl who captured the dragon's heart. He has made you quite famous in certain circles. What do you want?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want to send your protector a message," Kazuo said smoothly. "That nothing is untouchable. That he has a weakness. He believed he held all the cards. He believed he had time. He was wrong." Ryusiai's network moved with the speed and lethality of a striking cobra. They didn't just look for Annalise. They dismantled Kazuo's entire operation from the outside in. Financial assets were frozen. Safe houses were compromised. Key personnel vanished from the streets. While Kazuo was monologuing, his empire was turning to ash. The rescue, when it came, was not a chaotic firefight. It was a silent, overwhelming invasion. The door to her room didn't burst open. It was simply unlocked. And standing there was not a team of commandos, but Ryusiai himself. He was alone, but the power he projected was that of an army. His eyes met hers, and she saw a raw, unguarded emotion there for the first time. Not just anger, but a profound, possessive relief that stole her breath. He didn't say a word. He simply walked to her, cut her bonds with a small, wicked-looking knife, and helped her to her feet. His touch was firm, grounding. As he let her out, she saw the aftermath. Kazuo and his men were on their knees, held at gunpoint by Ryusiai's silent, black-suited soldiers. Kazuo looked up, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You'll regret this, Ryusiai," he spat. Ryusiai paused, turning to look down at his defeated rival. His voice was devoid of heat, as cold and final as a eulogy. "You are mistaken," he said softly. "You are the one who will have regrets. All of them. In the very little time you have left," he guided Annalise away, not looking back, the sounds of a final, terrible justice beginning behind them. He wrapped his suit jacket around her shoulders, a gesture of pure, primal protection. The war was over. The retribution had just begun. In the days that followed, a quiet, chilling purge swept through the city. It wasn't reported on the news. There were no police investigations. But the elite of the city felt the tremor. The 3 women who had laughed at Chio in the cafe found their lives systematically dismantled. One's husband was ruined by a sudden, catastrophic financial scandal. Another's carefully curated social standing evaporated overnight, her secrets laid bare for all to see. The third simply disappeared from the social register, her family's fortune gone, as if it had never existed. Mr. Henderson, the spineless manager of the Gilded Cup, found himself unemployable, blacklisted from every establishment in the city, his career ending not with a bang, but a whimper. And Kazuo's entire syndicate was erased, absorbed into Ryusiai's empire or scattered to the winds, a ghost story whispered in the underworld. Annalise saw none of this, but she felt it. She felt it in the absolute safety that now surrounded her, a bubble of power so immense it was terrifying. She recovered in the quiet of the penthouse, cared for by Chio, But it was the confrontation with Ryusei that she knew was inevitable. She found him one night in his office, standing before the vast window. "You destroyed them," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "All of them. The women from the cafe, my old boss." Kazuo, he turned to face her, his expression unyielding. "They made a choice. They chose cruelty. They chose to harm what is mine." His eyes held hers. "You are mine." Annalise, the possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. It did, but it also resonated with a strange, dark comfort. He was a monster, but he was her monster. "I don't want to be a reason for violence," she said, her moral compass struggling against the pull of his brutal protection. "You are not the reason," he countered, stepping closer. "You are the justification. There is a difference. This world is not kind, Annalise. It is built on strength. Your kindness is a strength I had forgotten exists. But it must be protected by a different kind of strength." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was electric, a jolt of danger and desire. "I will not apologize for keeping you safe. I will not apologize for eliminating those who would harm you. That is my world. And now it is yours." In that moment, something inside her shifted. She did not condone his methods, but she could no longer deny the world's ugliness, an ugliness she had experienced firsthand. She had tried to fight it with kindness and been punished. He fought it with overwhelming force and won. She leaned into his touch, a silent surrender, not of her principles, but of her illusions. She was no longer just a guest in his world. She was a part of it,